Have you ever noticed that when life finally gets calm, you find a way to stir up drama? Maybe your relationship is good, so pick a fight. Your career is stable, so you quit and chase the chaos. You say you want peace, but when it shows up, you destroy it. Why? Because you're not addicted to winning, you're addicted to the struggle. Until you see that, you're going to keep burning down everything you build. I'm Marc Azoulay, the host of the Men's Therapy Podcast. And today we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics. It comes up a lot in my work with guys, which is self-sabotage. This idea of really stirring up chaos, getting that dopamine drip, finding meaning through battle that a lot of men have. A lot of us are conditioned to believe that, right? If we're not fighting a fight, then we've gone soft. We're weak. We are coasting, we're cruising, we're settling. All these words that as men we are allergic to, right? We don't want to be a weak guy who just settles in life. We want to be a hero. We want to be battling. But what a lot of guys do, and me and self included until I, got deep into my own therapeutic work, is we self-sabotage. We find ways to mess it up, right? To trip over the finish line, as I like to say with some of my guys. And that is so that we can feel like a hero. And it seems a little counterintuitive, but let's dig into it a little bit. So the addiction to struggle, when I say that, it's really an addiction to cortisol and adrenaline. So those are our two main stress hormones. Adrenaline is what most people think of, right? That's kind of the fight or flight. It's where your pupils dilate. You get really like, revved up, right? You get ready to fight, flight, or freeze or fawn. You get ready to get jacked up, right? But cortisol is actually one that there's much more emerging research around. That's a long-term stress hormone. So if you're listening and you're just kind of like grouchy all the time, or you just feel kind of like is probably the best way, or just kind of like on edge, that's cortisol. That's a long-term stress hormone. It keeps your body in that state of being ready to pounce, but not actively fighting. And, spoiler alert, really the only way to get rid of that is exercise. Meditation does it a little bit, getting into a rest and digest. So, a massage can also do it. But really, exercise is the primary way to even start chip away at cortisol buildup. Uh, ask a lot of my guys if they're dealing with, anger management issues. They come in for anger management. I always ask them to get their cortisol checked out because a lot of these guys have just been kind of tightly wound and stressed out for years, if not decades. So of course they're pissed, right? Of course they're angry. And it's biological. I mean, there's a lot of stuff we can do in therapy, and there's a lot of emotional things you can do to cope with that and unwind it. But sometimes you just got to flush that shit out of your system. So men, why the struggle, right? So, men growing up, we have always idealized that warrior, especially in Western culture. Western culture is a warrior culture. We look at, war veterans, we look at superheroes, we see heroes from myth, we see kind of even the person who's kind of the entrepreneur, right? Who's pulled themselves up by their bootstrap. All that's about the struggle. All that is about fighting battles. And from men, we're told that our worth comes from overcoming those challenges, right? By getting stronger. And I will say that is valuable. I've been on record saying that I think men grow through challenge by overcoming challenge. And I think that's true. We do grow that way. But that's not the only way to find meaning in one's life. Oftentimes we have to do a lot of growing before we can find meaning. So if you're a young man and you feel like you haven't struggled, this episode probably isn't fully for you. But I will tell you, bring struggle into your life if you're that in that category. This is more for the guy who feels like he's constantly struggling and constantly fighting a battle, fighting people around him. Because again, we're told that the amount of wins we get means that we're a stronger man. But really, winning means you don't have to fight anymore. So the warrior archetype, if you're in that shadow version of it, right, kind of that, darker, less healthy version of it, you can be stuck in this overdrive battling state. You can be always trying to fight, always trying to pick a fight with a person. You can be angry in traffic. You can be finding some kind of nemesis in your life. It reminds me of a client. I have a client that, you know, was progressing up the job ladder, but every single time he progressed, he hated his boss, hated him. It didn't matter who they were, didn't matter how they were managing him. No matter what, he found a way to hate his boss. And what we found is that weirdly enough, was his primary source of motivation and why he progressed so much. He would look at their boss, he'd look at them, and he would say, I can do better. This person sucks in X, Y, and Z ways. I'm going to work my ass off until I win, until I take their job, essentially. And then when he moved up the ladder, he said, hey, I hate this person too. While that worked for him to some extent, right? I mean, he got promotions and he got more money. He was always angry and he always felt some version of oppressed or bullied or neglected or whatever the problem was with the boss. He always had a problem and he was always in this state of struggle and unease. And when he was doing well at his job and he found nothing to hate about his boss and things were going well, he would pick fights, with his boss, with his coworkers, with upper leadership and management. And eventually that led him to get fired and laid off. That's why he started to come to therapy was to figure out what's going on, right? In his exit interview, in kind of probably kinder words, they said, you're good at your job, but no one likes you. You know, he was really technically proficient at what he did, but nobody wanted to work with him. There were people that were transferring out of his organization, out of his group. There were people that, would avoid calls with him. And he basically got fired because of his personality, frankly. And you can see that a lot with people that are stuck in this warrior mindset because, well, again, like I'll say, it's everything is good in moderation. As men, we have to learn how to turn on the warrior when we need it. But if you're always a warrior, if everything is a fight, turns out no one wants to be around you and you end up feeling very lonely and upset. So for this client in particular, and for many other clients similarly, peace feels unsafe. A metaphor that we used for him is trying to find the hidden knife. And I'll explain that a little bit. So he grew up in a very chaotic household where there was abuse, there was a lot of trauma, and really what stood out, there was a lot of gossip. So on the surface, they looked out, his parents, his family looked really pleasant. They looked fine, right? They looked like an ideal family. Everyone was succeeding. The kids all had good grades. They were doing good in their sports and in their music and all that kind of stuff, right? But there was always this kind of negative thing in the background, something that the mom in particular would gossip about. There would be something that he would get criticized for, and he would never know where it would pop up. And he would call that the hidden knife, right? And when he goes to people, he wanted to know where the hidden knife was. So if there was something positive and peaceful and all smiles, he'd be like, "Where's the knife? Like someone's gonna stab me. Someone's gonna stab me. I need to know where the knife is." And in his almost kind of obsessive pursuit to find out what this person was keeping from him, what they were judging him for instance, he would often drive people away because these people weren't keeping anything. In fact, most of them didn't really know him well at all, so they didn't really have enough, material to even judge him about. And in close relationships, whenever he was with his wife and there was a time of peace, he would be really, really nervous about that. So he would create these fights and try to find that hidden knife. And when we dug down a little bit deeper, what we found is he didn't really know who he was if he didn't have a nemesis. Right? Back to the idea of the boss. He would always define his sense of self, his identity, as being not the boss. So if that boss was very micromanaging, he was like, "Oh, I'm not like her. I am very trusting of my employees and trusting of people." If his boss was very hands off, he'd say, "Oh, I'm not like him. I'm not lazy. I work hard." So his identity was so focused on not being something that he never thought about who he was. And that's so, so common for a lot of men. In fact, it's an important part of development. We do it as teenagers. We look out in the world and we say, I'm not that, I'm not that, I'm not that, I'm not that. But then we have to answer the question of who am I? And who am I when I'm not pushing against something, when I'm not in that struggle? So signs you might be to the struggle, right? If you're in this, you're always chasing a problem. Or like I'm talking about with my client, there's always a nemesis. There's always like this, evil villain in your life. You can often be sabotaging relationships when they get stable. You can, like this client trying to dig and find the conflict because you don't trust when things are going well. Or you can always just like push people away, right? Keep people in this constant sense of like, will they, won't they? Does she truly love me? Keep people at a distance so that you feel like you're constantly being pursued. That's another form of the struggle. Also, you can tell in kind of these micro moments if you struggle being alone, if you struggle with silence, if you struggle being in a calm environment, if you say when people say, I can never meditate, or you can't get a massage, or, if you're alone in the woods, you go crazy, right? If you start to feel that restlessness, it probably means that you might be addicted to the struggle. So here's how to do it. Just like anything, it's reps. It's reps. And I will link this with one of the most masculine things you can do is fight your inner demons. So if you are afraid of being alone, you're going to have to just be alone and deal with what comes up. If you're afraid of your mind, if you're afraid of your anxiety, if you're, start meditating, start being with those parts of yourself rather than pushing them away. If you are afraid of traveling by yourself, you're afraid something's going to go wrong, you're going to forget something, you got to take a solo trip. You can avoid stuff your whole life, but you're going to end up, one, unfulfilled, and two, controlled by these very things. Avoidance doesn't mean that you don't have to deal with it. It often means that they have more power over you than you want them to. A shift that you're going to have as you do that is you're going to move from the struggle being meaningful to other things. So, what's common for a lot of guys is protection, right? Protecting the people that you love. That can be meaning. That's still kind of that warrior energy, but it's not about the aggression. It's about defensive protection, often of a family or of a child. You can look at production being meaningful, right? Making something, whether that be at your job or ideally in art or a craft, right? Finding something that really gives you meaning because you're getting better at something. We talk about the pillars of masculinity. You can learn more about those on our website, but one of them is mastery. And this idea of pursuing mastery can be very meaningful for a lot of guys, right? Also, commitments and duties. So, making promises, a common one being the vow of marriage. Another one being promising to show up for your community, whether it be your PTA or your school or your church or your sports team, whatever it is. But showing up and practicing discipline is really, really important. If you can find other sources of meaning by practicing, by facing those demons, you're going to start to prioritize struggle being the only thing that matters. And what we're talking about ultimately is changing your view of masculinity. Being a man isn't only about being a warrior. Like I said before, you want to be able to turn it on and off when necessary, but it's not only fighting. It's also being a lover, right? Being a mentor, being a builder, right? Being a provider, being a magician, right? Being a king, being a leader. There's all these other ways that you can be a man. You don't have to be fighting all the time. And when you can expand your definition of what it means to be a man and be good at it, be a good man, you're going to find a ton more meaning coming into your life. So what I want to leave you with is that peace, contentment doesn't mean that you're weak, right? It means you are strong enough that you don't have to prove yourself anymore. You don't have to constantly be battling and overcoming and winning to prove yourself. You can rest. You can rest every once in a while and recover so you can then fight the fights that really matter instead of trying to fight everything. So if you're tired of being addicted to the struggle, reach out to us. Menstherapy.online. We have tons of therapists. We have groups. We have all these kinds of activities, online courses that can help you break free of this addiction to struggle. We can help you embrace peace, find contentment. And the first thing to do is to notice when you're creating chaos and basically just stop it. Do anything else, right? Rather than doing that self-sabotage and trying to slow down a little bit and notice the finer things, notice beauty in the world. So again, check us out, menstherapy.online. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week at the episode of the Men's Therapy Podcast.